Atheist Alliance International Podcast.
I don't make this stuff up.
You know, if you put Jesus Christ first, that he'll look after all your bills.
It's not fake, it's faith.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Atheist Alliance International Podcast. I'm your host, Jason. It's been a while since we've been here. I've been extremely busy. Our guest today is Bill Burkland, an author who's here to talk about his book. We've been trying for maybe 2 months, 6 weeks, 16 weeks to do this podcast, but I think God is upset with us because we had all manner of issues went wrong. Like missing equipment. We tried to do this a week or two ago, and then my laptop just died. I've been sick for a couple of weeks, so it seems like every single time Bill and I sat down to try and record this, the God was like, I'm going to screw with you. So we finally managed to get together after trying for about 6 to 8 weeks. So Bill Burkland is here. He's an American author, and he's written a humorous take on the birth narrative of Jesus. And the book title is The Misconceived Conception of a Baby Named Jesus, which, as I mentioned, is a kind of a humorous look at the virgin birth narrative. So, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Jason. And I hope the wait will be worthwhile. And I appreciate you having me. So thank you.
The only thing I'm worried about now going along is it's been raining really hard here, and when the last time it rained really hard, the platform, the StreamYard platform that we're using to record this, for some reason I couldn't get in when it's raining so hard. I guess it affected my connection and I couldn't even log in. And it was raining really, really hard. Like the roads were flooded this morning. So I'm waiting to see if it's in the next 20 minutes. But I think we'll be okay. So Bill's out there. So just tell us a little bit about yourself first, then we'll jump into the book.
Sure. So this is my debut novel, and I wrote it after spending the last 18 years as a senior manager at Amazon, and kind of prior to that, and maybe more specific to the book, I grew up in a Catholic. And kind of the book, to a large degree, was inspired, for better or for worse, by some of my early upbringing in church and in catechism classes. And so Jason, did I lose you?
Yeah, no, I just gave you the floor. I'm just giving profile.
I'm sorry. Okay. And so it was writing a novel had been a goal of mine, really since college. And so as I was nearing my retirement at Amazon, I thought, I'm going to sit down and write. This is not the novel that I sat down to write, but it evolved and changed over time to be what it is, and which is, as you mentioned, it's kind of a satirical take or retelling of the weeks before and the days after the birth of Jesus. It kind of takes the familiar characters and flips them kind of 180 degrees, and hopefully does so in a humorous way. And so that's kind of the my background and how I came to the book.
And so I'm guessing you're not a practicing Catholic anymore, even though you were raised Catholic. So, yeah.
I am not.
Yeah. Okay. And the book is out now, correct? Or
the book is out now. It's been out for just under a year. So we're coming up on. It was released in December of 2024.
Okay. So about a year.
About a year. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. And how are sales going?
It's good currently. I just looked this morning, right before I joined, and it happens to coincide with a promotion that on Kindle and all electronic books, whether it's Barnes and Noble or Apple, and it was number 3 in religious humor in Kindle on Amazon, and it was number, I think, 38 in satire. So I had the slot. No, I'm sorry, it was number. Yeah, 38, just above Catch-22, which is
It's one of my favorite books.
yeah, it was mine too. I think as a piece of satire, you just can't do any better. So it's yeah, I'm happy with how the book is selling.
Well, that's good. So how did you come up with the premise? Do you remember where the idea came from to spoof the Virgin Birth?
Yeah. So the premise, the when I sat down to write, a humorous book about a fourth wise man, and so to kind of play off the stories of Melchior and Caspar and Balthazar, and add kind of a fourth wise man who was a bit of a loose cannon. And so I began to write that story and about kind of the people he would meet and what he would do to prepare to meet the Son of God, and one of the people, of course, that he would meet in doing so would be Mary. And I thought about, well, who was Mary? And I thought, she's a 14, 15-year-old girl who got pregnant. And I thought, well, I have two daughters. They're in their 30s now. But I thought, what, as a parent, what would I do if my 14-year-old girl was pregnant? And then that is really what kind of spun the story up. And I thought the central conflict in the book is between Mary, who firmly denies that this is a divine birth, that it was due to a union between she and Joseph, and her mother and her father. And her mother is devoutly believes in the scriptures and the prophets, the word of the prophets, and so believes that this could be the virgin birth that Isaiah and Micah spoke of. And then her father, who is a rich merchant who believes that having the Son of God could bring him business advantages. And so that's really where the story began to take off. And the fourth wise man, there's elements of where I started. In this book, there's 5 wise men, and they're much more interested in a good time, having a bit of a laugh and a lot of drink, than seeing the Son of God. So that element, that kernel that it started with is still in the book, but the central kind of nature, the central conflict of the book evolved over time.
Yeah, that does happen. As a writer myself, I do the same thing. I start with one idea and it just goes somewhere else. Like I did a script. I wrote a screenplay this year. Yeah, I think it was earlier, like in the spring. And I was writing Act 1, and what was sort of my B story, I thought, this is much more powerful that I take what was going to be the A story and make that the B story. And I took my B story and made that the A story. And I think it became a much better story. And I've done it in a couple of writings where I just go where the creativity takes me. Like I don't lock myself, like, I'll do my layout and go, okay, I'm going to follow this strictly, because while you're writing, you have these creative ideas. It's like, okay, why should I chain myself to this? This creative idea that I just had is better than the one I had originally. So why not follow that and see where it leads? So yeah. I totally get that.
Yeah, absolutely. I found that this was my first novel that I've written, and it was a bit of a surprise. What you just described, absolutely happened in my writing. It not only kind of on the big themes, but also kind of line to line of dialogue. It kind of unfolds before you, which was just it was a super interesting process that I enjoyed and was surprised by.
Yeah, yeah. So like when we're laying out the story idea, like I'm doing a story beats. You're already in your creative space and you're having these ideas, but then when you're actually into the writing, like it's almost like a whole other level of creativity opens up. And then I did one recently. I was writing a short script, and I wanted to just write Act 1. I don't think I went that far. I think maybe I got about a quarter of the way through Act 1, just because I wanted to see if the layout that I had established was going to change in some dramatic way, like the script I had done earlier in the year, and it didn't. It pretty much stayed pretty close. So, but I think it's unusual for me. I think when I write, it's generally the story tends to evolve. It doesn't stick so closely. It
Yeah.
will evolve on its own, and I think it becomes better, right? Because
Yeah.
you're not corralling yourself into something that really isn't working. And if you come up with a better idea, then for it. So
Yeah. Completely agree. I found that I was a very non-linear writer. I was,
oh,
you know, first part of the book, then at the end.
I don't think of the books I've written, I don't think I've ever started with chapter one.
Yeah.
I think I've, well, maybe not entirely true. But I think of the two big books that I've completed, I started in the middle of both of them.
Yeah.
The most recent one, just because the person about who I was was Spinoza, the 17th century Dutch philosopher, and I was doing a history of his book, the Theological Political Treatise. And that's the title alone tells you what the book is about, the Theological Political Treatise, religion, and get religion out of politics is basically the source of the book. So I was really captivated by the title. So I started researching that first, even though it was like in the middle of my book. So yeah, I do that also too. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I'll jump to the and then I jump back to the beginning, and I've got notes sprinkled all over the place. So
Yeah.
I totally get that.
I mean, yeah.
And so you mentioned Isaiah and Micah, and we talked about this off stage. So that's kind of where, so for people, the viewers who are familiar with me and my channel, I tend to write about the Bible and doing deconstructions of biblical books, the context, the era in which it was written, and how that context shapes the writing. And so one of the things with Isaiah particularly, and not a lot of people know this, the book of Isaiah is actually three separate writings. It's written over three vastly distinct eras. So the original Isaiah is writing from the Assyrian captivity, like in the 8th century. And then the second Isaiah is like the Babylonian captivity in the early, like sort of 500s BCE. And then third Isaiah is the Second Temple era, leading up to the, from the post-Babylonian captivity. And same with Micah. I believe, don't quote me on this, I believe the first two chapters of Micah are considered, it's either the first two or the first three, and then like the last three or the last two are their Second Temple era. So the original Micah and the original Isaiah are written in sort of like 8th century, and then the later chapters that are mentioning these sort of messianic passages like you allude to, these are from centuries, like several, like in the case of Second Temple Judaism from the 8th century to so from like the 700s to the 400s, we're talking like a gap of 300 and 400 years between these authors. So we talked about this off stage. So as I want to see myself a biblical scholar, but I'm better read than the average person. So maybe scholar light, biblical scholar light. So knowing this about Micah and Isaiah, that was kind of like the only issue that I had with your book. But it's not really an issue because the Bible itself does exactly what you did by sort of slamming these traditions together and making your it's exactly what you would understand. Like with Isaiah, with Micah, with other books in the Bible that are, claiming that, in certain cases, like with Isaiah and third Isaiah, borrowing that legitimacy of the original author, even though he's writing hundreds of years later. So I didn't see it so much as an issue, more like this was you mimicking the style of the Bible and smashing stuff together the way the biblical authors did.
Yeah, I didn't. So I was a very bad Catholic. I like you know more. I think you probably know more than 99.9% of the population. So I think that you're being modest in your knowledge. I did not have that depth of knowledge in terms of how kind of the Bible was put together. Where I arrived at Micah, the chapters, the first chapter is Isaiah, how he came to his prophecy of the virgin birth of the Son of God, and then the second chapter is Micah, how he pointed to Bethlehem as being the place. I added those after I had written the core of the story, so the birth, and the reason I added those is because I thought that without those, without the prophecy, then this birth really does not mean anything. Like I think without those kind of precursor texts, then the New Testament probably doesn't exist. The birth of Jesus doesn't have the same importance. And so, and then as a work of fiction, is this mismatch of things. So I wanted to include biblical characters, I'll call them real, but from the Old Testament, so Micah and Isaiah, the wise men, of course, who were part of the New Testament story around the nativity, the character of Mary and Joseph. But I also wanted to then introduce, a very fanciful things like a talking cat, and so, and then I mix in the story, which originated in the 1940s, of the little drummer boy, to kind of mix in parts of the Bible with parts of things that are unrelated, but often associated with it too, as part of a kind of, it was I guess my satiric method to do the mismatch of things. And I but in terms of the historical, the kind of the scholarly part that you mentioned about both Micah and how those were written over hundreds of years and by likely many people, those things really didn't enter my thinking as I was writing the book.
Yeah. And like I said, like the biblical authors do exactly the same thing. Like they make all kinds of anachronistic comments all through the Bible. So it's like I said, to me, it wasn't an issue, because to me, it was like you were mimicking the style of the Bible to basically tell the story of the Bible. So maybe just quickly, if you're interested as well, maybe for the followers, I can give a very quick sort of history lesson on these messianic beliefs. Would you be interested in that?
Absolutely.
So the reason why, so this passage in Isaiah 7:14, that a young woman shall bear a son. Well, that is taking place, as I said. Isaiah is being written during the period of the Assyrian conquest. Now, those of you who remember this, the northern kingdom of Israel was the one that was deployed. Judah sued for peace and became a vassal state. So Judah was not exiled. They didn't get exiled until the Babylonian captivity, and that's when Messianism is born. So in First Isaiah, First Isaiah is the writer writing those early chapters. I think it's like the first 30 to 40 chapters of Isaiah, something like that. That is legitimately tied to the person in the 8th century. Now, Messianism is born out of the Babylonian captivity, because that is when the Babylonians, so Israel's already off the stage by this point. Judah is the only one left standing. When the Babylonians, so they kill one king, I think Zedekiah maybe, or Jeconiah maybe, something I can't remember exactly. I've got it all written down. So we have it all written down. One of the kings gets killed, and then like his nephew or brother or something like that becomes the next king. He then and his children are then exiled to Babylon. And this is when Messianism is born, because now the Davidic dynasty that ruled over Judah is gone, right? They're still alive, but they're essentially captives. And then when Cyrus releases them, and this is, are you familiar with? I did a podcast with Professor John Collins of Yale. Are you familiar with him at all?
I didn't know.
Okay, so Fuller's a professor of Old Testament criticism at Yale. He's got a book. I actually just did. I just did a video a couple weeks ago. I'll post the link here in the chat for the people who want to go see it. He's got a book called. Hold on, just quickly. I'm just completely drawing a blank. The title of the book is. Got this. Scepter in the Storm. Now, the scepter in the storm, because I've asked him, he said, I know what the messianic passages that the Christians think, like the ones in Isaiah, like the suffering servant, that kind of stuff. The messianic passages that are considered messianic by the Jews themselves. So Professor Collins sent me this book called Scepter and the Star, which I'll put a link in the chat for people. It'll show up in the upper right corner that they can go and review that book. And he talks about there's really only two books of the Old Testament that have a messianic call to them, and that's Haggai and I believe Zechariah are the only two books. So the king and his sons who had gone to Babylon. So another 100 years later, so after Cyrus the Great, the Persians defeat the Babylonians. One of the two was known as the Exilarch, so the king in exile, basically. With a monarch in exile. So it's called the Exilarch. And his name is Zerubbabel. Now, Zerubbabel comes back to Jerusalem with a lot of the exiles, and they rebuild the Second Temple. And in so much as Zerubbabel was the only surviving member of the Davidic dynasty, who maybe 100 years after the Babylonians had wiped out the dynasty and took the king off the throne. Zerubbabel, so these messianic expectations were put onto Zerubbabel, but he basically, he was essentially made the governor of the Persian province of Syria. He was made because he was an exilarch. He was made governor in Jerusalem of Syria for the Persians, but other than that, like he never took on the mantle of the Messiah, of being a member of the Davidic dynasty. So all of these passages that relate to monotheism and messianism, all of these passages that relate to calls for a messianic return of the Davidic dynasty, can only come in the post-Babylonian period after the dynasty has been removed. So in Isaiah, like there's, I think in Isaiah 9, either 9 or 11, and Professor Collins points this out. There's a passage, I believe in Isaiah 11, that talks about restoring the dynasty. Well, don't forget, original Isaiah is written in the 700s. It's not going to be until the 500s that the dynasty is wiped out.
Yeah.
So very good. For messianism that's in an era, really think like paleontology, like a boom that is in a more recent strata than the time in which they live. This is what's happening in the Bible.
Yeah.
These messianic calls that are showing up in books like in Micah, with that, like the last chapters of Micah saying, the Messiah will come from the city of David. Well, that's obviously a Second Temple reference that could not be original to Micah. Same with Isaiah. I believe it was Isaiah 11. This restoration. Well, if Isaiah is writing in the 700s and they're not going to get taken out for another 200 years, how can you have a messianic call? So all of these messianic passages that are occurring in earlier years before the Babylonian exile, the scholars know it's bullshit. It has to have been invented and slipped in, because it's not the situation. You do not have a messianic call while you have a king sitting on the throne. It would be ridiculous. And they're calling for the restoration of the monarchy as long as Charles and the whole family is still alive. Like if the whole family got wiped out by COVID, say, then you could legitimately have a messianic call for the Windsor dynasty in England, but they're all still alive. So thinking about that would be an anachronism. So it's this really weird, like the way all of this stuff sort of shapes out, and the way the scholars have teased out these little threads over the years. So yeah.
Jason, you sound like you've got to get that in the book, your own book.
Here it is. Hey, let's just make a quick note here. Scepter and the Star. Yeah. So the other book that I've got, I'm trying to get it published right now. It's a history of the Catholic Church and how the Catholic Church basically just lied about everything. Like they just made up everything. Like, Christian dogma per se, and there is some of that. But the Catholic Church as the papal primacy, they made up. They just completely made all of that up to serve their own interests. So, and I'm trying to get that book published right now. So,
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic.
yeah.
Yeah, do you have a title?
Sins of the Fathers.
Yeah.
So, because it was originally, it was a, so I know this is supposed to be you're talking about your book. Okay, that book actually emerged as a chapter of a much broader history of secularism. So I was looking at chapter one, classical. This is the Spinoza one I was talking about. So I started with Spinoza in chapter 5,
Yeah.
and calls for secular society and freedom of thought. And then I went back to chapter 1 is classical antiquity. Chapter 2 is the rise of Christianity and the collapse of basically philosophical thinking for 1,000 years. And then chapter 3 picks up to in the Renaissance and then moving forward up again. So this chapter in the rise of the church was getting so long and so detailed that I decided to make it its own book. And what I'll do for the broader history, I'll just strip it back down to the broad strokes. But what I found was there was a forgery in 501 that I almost skipped over completely. This forgery actually laid the groundwork for what we're seeing today in the church, particularly in regards to the response to the sexual abuse crisis. This we'll get it into a way, we'll police ourselves, thank you very much. We're not going to report this to the authorities. None of that comes from this forgery in 501. And so what I end up doing is I just end up linking it all together, like showing how that forgery built an earlier forgery, then the next forgery built on both of them, and then further forgeries, and then the Popes just started declaring, papal primacy is me. So
Yeah. House of Cards. Incredible. I'm looking forward. I would love to read that.
yeah. So your book, so we're talking about so you spoke on the conception. So you basically you use Luke as your what's the word, scaffolding or your architecture. You're basically using the story that Luke is telling, and you actually have Luke sitting down to write the story.
Yeah. So just as I thought, so I wrote the core of the story, kind of that take place kind of the weeks before and a few days after the birth. And then I thought about kind of adding at the beginning Isaiah to frame it with the prophecies of Isaiah and Micah. I thought really then what's important is what happened afterwards. Like what was the ripple impact? How was the story told? And that's kind of how Luke sits down and draws on unreliable oral stories, unreliable, third, fourth hand accounts of the birth, accounts from people who had, various motives, none of which had to do with telling the truth. So that was kind of Luke sitting down and trying to figure this out, and based upon input that was unreliable, he writes an unreliable account of the birth, the angels coming down to the shepherds, and then I thought, well, okay, so that's how the story is kind of that's what gets its the story. The ripple effect after, kind of in the maybe the century after, but what about today? What are the kind of the rippling effects today? And so the final chapter takes place in it's Christmas Eve Mass at the Vatican in 2021, and I watched the Mass probably, I don't know, 3-4 dozen times, and just extracted kind of at the time it was Pope Francis. So I took his words, I took kind of the visual surroundings of the grandiose basilica, and kind of ended it with what started out as a series of mistold tales and mistaken identities, and has ended up impacting billions and billions of people today and over time. So I kind of wanted to bookend the book with how the birth stories, the context of the birth stories, and then the after effects, the ripple effects of the event of a baby that was born that was deemed to be the Son of God.
Yeah, it was interesting. So was there a reason why you only chose Luke and not Matthew as well? Because a lot of biblical scholars, they think that Luke used Matthew as the template and then made some changes of his own. So is there a reason why you focused only on one and not the other?
Yeah, it was. I wanted to keep it relatively short, and then I chose Luke specifically for his the chapter and verse about the angels and the shepherds, because the shepherds are in the book, and again, they're similar to the wise men. They're kind of an unruly bunch who happens to be in Bethlehem to celebrate Saturnalia. So fill up on before they go back into the fields to their sheep, to fill up on a bunch of wine and have an otherwise good time with. And so I wanted to use kind of the contrast of. I wanted to paint a picture of who the shepherds were, which is this kind of this dubious group of fun-loving shepherds, versus the passage that Luke wrote, which is the angel coming down to them, and so that was the reason. And then plus I think Luke, I don't know, and you would know this much better than I thought Luke. My impression was that Luke was always thought of as the most kind of scholarly of the gospel writers, and so
I don't know about that per se. Obviously, there's differences between the four gospels, the three synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Well, I do know that Professor Bart Ehrman,
yeah.
not so much the scholarly tone of Luke, but he in progression of Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, the progression of the Gospels being written, that the end times narrative, the kingdom narrative, is slowly toned down from Matthew to Mark to Luke to John. So it's very evident in Mark, it's gone in John. And in Luke, if I remember correctly, in Luke it says the kingdom of God is within you. It's not something that is future, that is coming. It's already present within you. So that's what I remember of Luke.
Yeah. And the reason I thought it does feel, and you mentioned this earlier, like it does feel like this game of telephone tag, where a story gets told to one person, then it gets told to another, then it gets told to another, and by the time you're on your seventh person, the story has no kind of similarities or resemblance to what the original story was, and that's kind of what I was trying to do with the Luke chapter.
Yeah. And I believe I used that exact same analogy in my first book. I refer to the Bible and the Gospels as Christianity as a game of telephone, that the details just get changed from one telling to the next. So that's a very good analogy. So
yeah.
The other issue on Luke, on the biblical story of Luke, is there's two interesting aspects. I'm sorry.
After I wrote the book, I got a lot of that. So
sorry. It's the background. It just blends and merges. So interesting aspects of the Luke narrative that differ from Matthew's. And the first is there's more than one. The first is the chronology. Not chronology, the genealogy. The genealogy that Matthew gives versus the genealogy that Luke gives are completely separate. And yet both of them converge at Zerubbabel. oddly enough, they both converge as Zerubbabel and then diverge again. So the genealogies are completely different. But the other reason, that a thing that I liked about Luke, well, not like about Luke, but the historicity of Luke is the census. That to get him to Bethlehem from Nazareth required this Roman census, which scholars know never happened.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
never any requirement for a census. The census that did happen occurred only in Syria. It didn't occur in Palestine, and those areas of Roman control. There's it's just one right at the end, kind of like at the end of the book of Matthew, they flee who is master of the innocents, and they go to Egypt, but in Matthew's they just return to Nazareth. So there are some differences between Matthew and Luke, but Luke's use of the census has just been completely destroyed by scholars, that they know that never happened. So
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
again, this whole issue of Bethlehem, it comes from Micah, because that post messianic edition in the Second Temple era to Micah, saying that the Messiah will come from the city of David. So that's
Yeah.
very much a fact from centuries later. So
Yeah. It's a retrofitting.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been interesting when you were waving your finger, and I know you weren't waving your finger, but I've the reactions of the book. I think I've gotten very widely. So some of them are, this is completely inappropriate. It's offensive. To this is just what's needed, and then kind of everything in between. In the in between, I went to a book festival. It was a literary festival in Woodstock, Vermont, called Bookstock, which is it's a great literary festival. And I had people. There's three other examples that are kind of in between this. One is a guy who is probably in his 70s, long beard, came up and began to tell me a story about how in the 60s, and he assured me, he made a point of assuring me that he was neither on mushrooms or acid, which he did in the 60s, that he had a hallucination that he was Jesus on the cross, and his friends had to kind of take him down. And that was one. I got a story. And then another story, another guy came up and told me about his 11 years as a Hare Krishna priest. And then another one, a young woman came up with the book. She bought the book the day before. She came back, and I thought, oh, she must really like the book. And she came back and she said, hey, I saw on the back cover that you've been married for 40 years. How do you do that? Like, how do you? And so the reactions have been, some of them have been fun and interesting, and some of them kind of,
I get the same, like with the videos that I do on my YouTube channel. Particularly the ones revolving around the Catholic Church and the popes. Some people love them. Like I had this one series, and you want to stand out on YouTube, right? Like, you need to find a way to differentiate your content from somebody else's.
Yeah.
So I was trying to make it funny and make it stand out. So I had a series. So the popes from about 1850 up to 1929, and the signing of the Lateran Accords, creating Vatican City as a state. All of the popes in that were very reactionary against modern liberal secularism. And so I called the series Pope Snowflake, because the popes were basically just finding these meltdowns and just issuing encyclical after encyclical, ranting and ranting against modernism and modern secular liberalism. And of course, certain people are like really offended, like, oh, I'm telling you, like, all these popes a snowflake, it's so disrespectful. And yet other people, particularly ex-Catholics, it's like, it's like, this is exactly the right tone for, like, throwing shade on these groups, and, like, the way they were reacting like petulant children. So I make comments all the time for people like Christians who are like deeply offended, and free thinkers who find the humor in it. So
I mean, I think it's part of kind of when I think there's any writing about religion, I think the writer is subject to kind of both those types of reaction. I think it's part of the kind of part and parcel of what we write about. I do think it's important. Like, I think like your upcoming book, kind of to circle back, like I think it's important to examine that and to make people aware of that, and then let them judge. Let them judge about kind of what they think, but to kind of sweep these things and to sweep the discrepancies and you mentioned the forgeries under the carpet is not the right thing to do. And so I think shining a light on those and letting people, think what they may of it is the right thing.
Well, John Collins, the Yale professor, the Old Testament scholar, I asked him to read it. And even though the Old Testament is his profession, he actually started off as a Catholic monk, and then the monastery sent him off to university to train. And he's still a devout Catholic. And about a day or two later, he maybe got a chapter or two in, and he got this very negative email from me, like, "What do you think the animists, wanted me to write this book?" And like, dude, I'm just presenting the history. I don't need the Catholic Church to do all this stuff. I'm just presenting it as a chronological catalog of the things that they did in service of themselves and their own power.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So I didn't make them lie. I didn't make them create forgeries. I didn't make them, kill people. Just all of it was documenting it. So and the professors who have read it love it. Like one of the professors at the University of Chicago. Because it's really important that this information gets out there, that people should know this is what happened. So,
yeah, super interesting. I'm eager to get my hands on
it. Yeah, if you want, we can chat about it off stage as well. But if there's a particular area, like I said, it's chronological. So it was originally going to go from the dawn of Christianity to the Renaissance, but I brought it right up to the death of Pope Francis. Excuse me. So if there's a particular area that you like, I can extract that chapter. Like I have a chapter on Bruno and Galileo and what was done to them as this science was starting to emerge, like the rigorous science and how they fought back. So every chapter sort of has its own focus, whether that focus is either the chronological era or something very specific that happened, like the forgeries, I'll have a chapter I don't know if the chapter specifically focuses on the forgery. It's been a while since I've gone back and looked at it, but every chapter is essentially a self-contained chronological summary of whether it was a forgery or whether it was civil war or a declaration by a pope or a letter that they wrote to an emperor, and just trying to make the chapter cohesive from that sort of perspective, that it's either a time frame or it's discussing specific elements that are happening over that, say, 100 or 200 years. So
I think I'd be most interested, and we can talk offline, but in the early chapters, starting in 501. I just read a book called Jesus Wept, and the name of the author escapes me, but it kind of chronicles the last 7 popes. The one right before, which I don't remember his name, before Vatican II.
Before that, the one who followed Vatican II, the one before Vatican II. So Pius XII. So Pius XII, who was the Pope during World War II, and then John the 23rd was the one who called the Second Vatican.
Yeah, so it starts there and through Francis, and it's a pretty similar to your book and your podcast. I think the kind of devout Catholics aren't particularly fond of it, but it's a factual book, and so I think going back, I think I'd be most interested in your book to look at the early stuff.
Yeah, so I start off with sort of Eastern Christianity. So because all of the early Christian scholarship was all happening mostly in Alexandria, some of it in Antioch. There was nothing going on in Rome in the early centuries. Like you look at all of the early writers, they're all pretty much in Alexandria. Where you've got the history of Alexandria. And a lot of these guys were, before they were Christians, these men were trained in Greek philosophy. They'd trained on, in Aristotle. They had trained under Plato. They'd looked at Stoicism. And with Platonism and Stoicism, they saw sort of it was very sort of attainable with Christianity, the tenets of Platonism and Stoicism. So a lot of these guys were very, or, Alexandria being founded by Alexander and the library there, a lot of knowledge. So a lot of the early Christian scholarship, Origen, Clement, what were some of their names? Actually, like even if you look at like Tertullian and Augustine, they're not in Rome either. They're in, I think, what we would call Tunisia today, was ancient Carthage. It wasn't Carthage at that point, but sort of that general area. All of the early writers in that number in Rome. Rome itself, like there was nothing going on. Like it was the center of the imperial administration, but from the church, like there's really nothing going on in Rome until about 440 with Pope Leo. Pope Leo the Great. Leo the Great is sort of, so in 440 we're about 30. Excuse me. The end of the Western Roman Empire was like 472, something like 470, 475. I can't remember exactly. So by 440, we're within a few decades of the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. So by 440, with Pope Leo the Great, you kind of have the first emergence of popes flexing their civic muscles, because Leo is sort of stepping into the power vacuum of a collapsing Rome. By this time, the capital is not in Rome. The eastern capital is Constantinople.
Yeah.
The western capital is Milan. It's not Rome anymore. So it's only by about 440 that folks start to take on this mantle of running the city, because the senators weren't doing it anymore. So for like the first 300-400 years, just not much going on in Rome, and then like they basically just rewrote the history. So there's a great quote. One of my source books says there was nothing to stop Gregory the Great from rewriting early Christian history to make Catholics and the Pope central to, and so he did. And that's one of the points that's in the book, is that Gregory the Great essentially rewrote Catholic history, and that's what Catholics still believe today.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how history is written.
Yeah. By the victors. That's the thing. It's in Judah. That's why Judah, because Israel was a wipe out from that, the victors write the history. So
yeah,
when you look, if you look like at the Book of Kings, written by the scribes in Judah, if you look in Kings, when it talks about the kings of Israel, it's like, he did wicked and evil in the eyes of the Lord, one after the other. They just slandered all the kings of Israel. Like Jezebel, right? Jezebel, one of the great building projects of Solomon, those were all done by the kingdom of Israel under Ahab and his family. And then they get celebrated by the writers of the Bible, even though all of the great monuments and buildings were done by the kingdom of Israel, not by Judah. So,
yeah. There's a couple. It's I think in one of the chapters, I think when the conflict between Mary and her mother, Mary, her mother, and the high priest of Bethlehem, and Mary, then they're arguing about the nature of her pregnancy. Psalms comes up, the book of Psalms, and they have an argument about kind of, well, who wrote it and when was it written, and why was it written, and I think it's just what you're talking about, who writes history, and the same, I think, with in Luke, in the chapter on Luke, I mentioned that Luke is a student of Josephus, and I think that there are history is it's stitched together in ways that often are not reliable.
For sure. Yeah, and even with Josephus, like there are scholars who think some of the passages in Josephus are later forged insertions. Same with the Bible. Like there was stuff in the Bible that they're going back to the church. The passage was at Matthew 16, where it says, "Simon, you are the rock upon which I shall build my church." So that's a forgery for multiple reasons, which I'm not going to go into here, but they know it's a forgery. For one, it doesn't appear in any of the other gospels. This is an end times church. There's no need, an end times ministry. There's no need for a long-term church. Like, thou shalt not taste death till my Father's kingdom has come. This is an end times prophecy in their lifetimes. So there is no need for a church. That passage in Matthew 16 doesn't show up in the other gospels, and when it does, the verses before and after are there in the other gospels, but that one naming Peter as the head of the church is absent. So they know it's an insertion. The church knows it's an insertion, but it doesn't serve them motive to live it. So.
Yeah, interesting.
Any parting thoughts you'd like to share about your book?
Other than it's just a plug. I mean, I think it's mid-November, coming up on the Christmas season, and I think while we're inundated with the traditional kind of traditional Christmas tropes, it's an alternative. It's an alternative for those who I don't know, those who believe and have a sense of humor. I think, frankly, most of the people that I've talked to that have read the book are actually Christians who have a sense of humor and who don't mind the kind of the poking. I think their faith is deeper than kind of what the poking of the book. But I guess it would be an alternative book to read, hopefully for a bit of a laugh, while sometime during the holiday season. So, I hope.
If you have friends and family who like to read and like religion, The Misconceived Conception of a Baby Named Jesus could make an interesting stocking stuffer, or something you can just wrap up and put under the tree. I like to read. I like getting books. So
yeah, I mean, if you gift it, the people will either hug you for giving you a good book, or they'll never talk to you again because the book offended them. So, you have to be careful.
Well, it could be a good way to get rid of not talking to them.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So check it out. We'll put a link in the description if you want to go find his book. We'll put the link there for you to go find it. Thank you, Bill, for coming on and sharing with us your what inspired you to write this and how you kind of changed. I apologize for me kind of hijacking a few sections there, just to give a little bit more background.
That's great. No, Jason, thank you for your time, and I love kind of that the how you historically frame kind of. I think it adds to kind of the context of what I wrote about. So it's super helpful, and I'm super eager to see your book.
Let's go back to the lobby and we can chat a bit more. So
great.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming on. So check out the description. You can find Bill's book there if you're interested in reading it, or if you want to gift it to somebody for Christmas, by all means, please do. So thanks, everybody. I know it's been a while. I don't know when the next podcast will be, but hopefully it won't be so long again. So thank everybody. Take care and hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll see everybody on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for listening, and don't forget we're on YouTube, so follow us on YouTube. Just search for Atheist Alliance International, and please subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're also on all of your favourite podcast platforms, so make sure that you follow us on there as well. See you next time.